Hey everyone, so today I want to address a major growing topic of discussion, which is where Kaido will end up among the ranks of One Piece villains when all is said and done. Because I believe by the end of Wano, Kaido is almost guaranteed to be considered the greatest One Piece villain so far. So Doflamingo fans, Crocodile fans, listen up, because in this video I'm going to be breaking down why Kaido is on a trajectory to become a villain unlike any we've ever had in the series before. Also, reminder that you have 1 week left to get your Morge plush figure. This is limited edition, so there are not going to be any more made after this week. And if we sell 200 plushies in that time, I will finally make the biggest analysis video I have been holding off on, the Marineford arc analysis. You can get your plush today by hitting the link in the description below. So, before getting into the great One Piece villains of the past, let me quickly explain the characters I'm not including in this discussion. Katakuri is not a character that I personally consider to be a villain. He was an antagonist for Luffy in the Whole Cake Island arc, but he wasn't really written like a villain. Oda did not try to portray him as this evil big bad that needs to be defeated. Katakuri was purely written as an obstacle to Luffy rather than a villainous figure that was morally opposed to everything Luffy stands for. Now, you might have your own opinion that Katakuri was a quote-unquote bad guy, that he did some morally inexcusable things like attacking those chefs, but I'm talking more so in terms of how Oda chose to portray Katakuri, because Oda definitely swept that chef incident under the rug and portrayed Katakuri in more and more of a positive light the further the battle went on. Oda clearly wanted the reader to gain respect and admiration for Katakuri. He was not meant to be, a hateable figure the way true One Piece villains are written. I think Oda went out of his way to show that Katakuri's motivations came from a very pure place, and that he was actually an honorable figure underneath it all, who was actually very similar to Luffy in a lot of ways. They just happened to fall on opposing factions with opposing goals. So I will not be including Katakuri here in this discussion because I don't think he's a true villain in that sense compared to traditional One Piece villains. And I will also not be including the likes of Akainu and Blackbeard, not because they aren't written like villains, but because they absolutely are written like villains, but because their time in the story has not yet come. I'm more so stacking Kaido up against past arc villains, past arc bosses, the big bads of past storylines that Luffy has ultimately had to take down. It's the same way I wouldn't have discussed Doflamingo as a villain prior to Dressrosa, even though he had been making waves in the story for hundreds of chapters already. So, all of that being said, looking at Kaido compared to past arc villains of One Piece, it is obviously too early to declare him the greatest, but why do I think everything is pointing towards him being set up to kind of claim that position among fans unanimously? Well, I think when discussing the best arc villains of One Piece in the past, the two names that I generally see come up the most are Doflamingo and Crocodile. I think these two stand out as the greatest One Piece villains to many readers for very different reasons. So first, let's talk about Crocodile. What makes Crocodile so memorable? Well, Crocodile essentially revolutionized what a One Piece villain could be. All the East Blue villains and even the initial Grand Line villains were fairly simplistic bad guy concepts. All of them were pretty much one-off obstacles for Luffy to defeat. We could expect them to go down quickly. They didn't really have large spheres of influence. At the end of the day, the early villains, even Arlong, ultimately felt pretty small time. They would oppress like a small village or something. Whereas Crocodile was a sudden leap forward in terms of the threat he posed. He was a Shichibukai, which was by far the most terrifying title a character could hold at that point in time in One Piece. In fact, Shichibukai seemed completely out of the Straw Hats' league at that point in time. Crocodile had a bounty 4 times the size of the previous big bads. Unlike past villains, Crocodile wasn't a one-off threat who they ran into, beat, and then moved on from. Rather, Crocodile was a long-term, distant obstacle, a giant shadow looming over the story for multiple arcs as this big final boss that they had to work towards. There were levels the Straw Hats had to go through before they could take Crocodile on, getting through waves of his subordinates over multiple storylines before they could fight the man himself. And most importantly, the scale of Crocodile's plan and the stakes that came with taking on Crocodile were exponentially greater than anything that had come before. Every single island the Straw Hats had been to up till Alabasta were tiny, self-contained little populations. The Straw Hats were fighting to save, little villages and small towns for the longest time. And then they came to Alabasta, where suddenly we're looking at a gigantic kingdom with millions and millions of lives at stake. An entire war is about to break out. and it's all being orchestrated by this criminal mastermind with thousands of subordinates. The scope of what Crocodile was doing was just so much bigger, so much grander than anything we had seen before. It changed our expectations of the level of conflict we could expect from One Piece. And lastly, Crocodile himself carried an entirely new sense of presence and formidability compared to prior One Piece villains. Crocodile is to date one of the few One Piece villains you could say had literally nothing comical about him. His design and demeanor was a classical mafia boss through and through. More importantly, he was incredibly brutally effective. His plan was layered, strategic, extremely ambitious, and it worked phenomenally well. Despite the Straw Hats' best efforts, the plan was practically unstoppable. There are about 5 different moments throughout the Alabasta arc where the Straw Hats attempt to stop the war and fail. Up until Crocodile himself was defeated, his plan was basically going to work. And on that note, not only was Crocodile Luffy's most difficult opponent to defeat ever, throughout the entire series, Crocodile still holds that title, taking 3 tries and a significant amount of luck. Crocodile was also able to build a strong, long-running dynamic with Luffy through those repeat encounters, which is rare for One Piece villains. It really got personal between Luffy and Crocodile, not just because Luffy had to, beat Crocodile to save Alabasta, but because we got to delve deeper into their clashes of ideals over multiple fights and their different perspectives on the value of trust and friendship. And on top of that, it became even more personal in terms of what Crocodile and Luffy represented as pirates and their differing philosophies of what could be achieved in this world. Crocodile, the first true great veteran pirate Luffy had to fight, a pirate who had hit his own ceiling and was now trying to show Luffy, the young hotshot, the way of the world, with Luffy viewing Crocodile as his first true test on his path to Pirate King, and the first great pirate he must surpass. Also, it helps that Crocodile was an extremely hateable villain as well, taking great pleasure from rubbing in the death and suffering he was causing in the protagonists' faces and mocking their ideals. So, to recap, on one hand, Crocodile had by far the most presence and final boss energy of any One Piece villain ever. As he dramatically raised the stakes and the scope of the story, he was hyper competent, had an incredibly ambitious grand plan, and to this date, was the most difficult challenge for Luffy to overcome. In fact, he was a seemingly impossible challenge at first. On top of that, Crocodile was extremely hateable, and again, to this date, had by far the most developed antagonistic relationship with Luffy. Now, on the flip side, Doflamingo stands out as a great villain because his actual character has more depth to it than any other One Piece villain so far. And Doflamingo is arguably the most compelling villain in the story. To start with, there are certain indescribable intangibles to what makes a character compelling to many people, but even before we got to Dressrosa, even before we learned about Doflamingo's story or who he really was, Doflamingo was just a captivating figure in any given chapter he was a part of. His design, his attitude, his chaotic nature, his mysterious abilities, and of course the best speech in One Piece history made him a really exciting character before we really knew much more about him. And when we finally got to his story, well, I don't think I need to get in depth into why Doflamingo's past is fascinating and perfectly justifies his hate, his motivations to see the world burn, and so on. I've seen people say Doflamingo is the most evil villain we've had in One Piece so far, and I think it comes down to him or Anel, which of course is no mistake by Oda, as they're both meant to represent gods. But the point is, it's impressive for a character so malicious to be written in a manner where readers are still able to understand to some degree where he's coming from. So Crocodile and Doflamingo, both very understandably pushed by different groups as the greatest One Piece villains so far, at least among the arc bosses. I think most people have one or the other as their top villain. Which brings us to Kaido. Here is the reason I believe Kaido is set to supplant both of them for the top spot. Both Crocodile and Doflamingo are lacking in one area relative to the other. We definitely got hints of Crocodile's past during Alabasta and what motivates him, but we didn't truly delve into who he is the way we did with Doflamingo. Crocodile's character during Alabasta was simply not as fleshed out as Doflamingo's character was during Dressrosa. Crocodile played the role of a villain really well, but he was not that deep or layered of a character. However, Doflamingo during Dressrosa was nowhere near as competent or formidable a villain as Crocodile in Alabasta was. Again, Crocodile in Alabasta was made to feel practically untouchable. He was almost never shaken or worried, he was seemingly invincible in battle, his plan continued to work flawlessly despite every attempt by the Straw Hats, whereas Doflamingo essentially starts the Dressrosa arc already stressed out, worried, and on the back foot, being outwitted by Law repeatedly, things falling apart, and from the get-go we are reminded that there are threats much bigger than Doflamingo out there. He is not untouchable, there are things he fears right now, and he needs to fix his new issues fast just to survive. So Doflamingo never was really written with that sort of aura of invincibility that Crocodile had, which was what made Crocodile feel like such a next level threat. Over the course of Dressrosa, we see Doflamingo's hold over his empire quickly crumble, and he's forced to a last resort pretty fast, not to mention other factors like being regularly reminded that he's just a middleman on the way to Kaido, who's the real big boss. Doflamingo got an early win in on Luffy, but he never really handed Luffy a devastating defeat the way that Crocodile stomped and humiliated Luffy and crushed his hopes multiple times. And Doflamingo's interactions with Luffy were fairly limited. His personal exchanges and real antagonistic relationship was primarily with Law. Luffy mostly filled in to take everyone else's hate for Doflamingo upon himself as his own burden to take Doflamingo down. So, I'd say Crocodile falls short of Doflamingo in some ways, and Doflamingo falls short of Crocodile in some ways. But now we have Kaido, and he seems like the complete package. First of all, Kaido is fast on his way to becoming everything Crocodile was and more. What Crocodile was relative to his time in terms of intimidation, power, sphere of influence, etc., that's what Kaido is today, but more. The same way Shichibukai was a next level challenge for Luffy back in the day, Kaido as a Yonko is the new version of that for Luffy in the New World. From the moment he was introduced, Kaido had that aura of invincibility, of daunting, just overwhelming threat that certainly blows even Crocodile out of the water. Kaido and his gigantic empire of pirates is again a huge leap forward in terms of the scale of what the Straw Hats as a whole are going up against. The team up between Kaido and Big Mom to find the ancient weapons and take over the world is also a huge leap forward in terms of stakes. The same way Crocodile got so much build up because it took multiple arcs to get to him, so too does Kaido now have literally multiple sagas dedicated to getting to him. And the conflict we have in Wano to take down Kaido, this gigantic war with multiple Yonko, multiple supernovas, is again a big step up for the Straw Hats, the same way the Alabasta War was a big step up back then. Kaido seems ready to supplant Crocodile as the most difficult opponent for Luffy, since he has already handed Luffy 2 brutal defeats, and the first real one-shot for Luffy in the entire story. And along with that, already we're seeing that personal antagonistic dynamic that is developing. They are getting more personal exchanges with each other through repeat fights and building up a real relationship. And once again, I like the fact that it's in the context of Kaido representing a wall to overcome on Luffy's journey to becoming Pirate King, similar to the way it was with Crocodile. But on top of that, it seems like we're also going to get the other side of things. It seems like we're actually going to delve deep into Kaido's character. It seems we're going to find out about his past and his motivations the same way we got to learn about Doflamingo. With every chapter we get more and more hints that there is a lot more to Kaido under the surface. He knows a lot, he has experienced a lot. There are layers to his goals that we have yet to uncover, and we may get to go even more in depth into Kaido's past than we did with Doflamingo. I also like the fact that the same way Doflamingo brought a lot of interesting philosophies to the story, philosophies that stem from his unique past and experiences, so too are we starting to see Kaido expressing philosophies, unique philosophies that seem to stem from impactful past experiences. I think the potential is there for Kaido to be the most fleshed out and fully realized villain we've ever had in the series, or at least as much as Doflamingo. So if we put everything together, by the time Kaido's backstory is done, we may have the consummate One Piece villain. Extremely high threat level, feels like an overwhelmingly daunting obstacle to overcome, has a grand ambition, raises the stakes of the story, the scale of the conflict, is highly effective and competent, makes for a very personal challenge for the protagonist, and will likely soon have depth to his philosophies and motivations, as well as a compelling history and narrative of his own. I think when all is said and done, by the end of Wano, there will likely be nothing any of the past arc bosses really have over Kaido. Aside from maybe hateability, I think Kaido doesn't really grind my gears the way Crocodile and Doflamingo did. Kaido's actually kind of a cool guy in moments if you ignore the 20 years of suffering he's put the people of Wano through. I'll say for me, Kaido has already been my favorite part of the Onigashima raid so far, and if he beats Luffy again and the raid fails, then it's pretty much a done deal. He's the unquestioned GOAT of One Piece villains in my eyes. So, if you enjoyed this video, then definitely like, comment, and subscribe, and you can support the channel by getting your own plush figure. I will be making a Marineford analysis when we hit 200, so get yours by hitting the link below. And you can also get my extended thoughts on this and all future topics by Patreon, link in the description below as well.